The pre-dawn darkness of August 7, 1942, hangs heavy over the Solomon Islands. Aboard dozens of transport ships, 11,000 United States Marines prepare for an operation unprecedented in American military history. For 8 months since Pearl Harbor, American forces have retreated, island after island falling to Japanese conquest. The Philippines lost, Wake Island surrendered, Guam captured, the British driven from Singapore and Hong Kong. The Dutch East Indies occupied, Australia threatened. The tide of Japanese expansion seems unstoppable. But today that changes. Today, the 1st Marine Division, commanded by Major General Alexander Vandegrift, will storm ashore on a steaming, jungle-covered island that most Americans have never heard of: Guadalcanal. The objective is modest yet revolutionary: seize a partially constructed Japanese airfield and hold it. For the first time in World War II, American forces will not retreat. They will attack. They will seize territory from the Japanese Empire. And they will hold it, no matter the cost. As the first landing craft grind toward beaches cloaked in morning mist, few aboard comprehend that this obscure island will become the crucible where the Pacific War's outcome is determined. Over the next 6 months, Guadalcanal will witness some of the most savage fighting of the entire war. 7 major naval battles will rage in the surrounding waters. Thousands of men will die in desperate nocturnal infantry combat. Ships will sink by the dozens. Aircraft will fall from tropical skies in flames. Both sides will commit every available resource to a struggle that neither can afford to lose. The campaign will be decided not by grand strategy or technological superiority, but by the endurance of exhausted, disease-ridden men fighting in conditions that approach hell on earth. Guadalcanal will break units and shatter reputations. It will forge legends and create ghosts. And when the guns finally fall silent in February 1943, the strategic balance of the Pacific War will have shifted irrevocably. Japan's offensive capability will be destroyed. America's path to Tokyo will be open. This is the story of Guadalcanal, the island where empires came to fight and die, where the course of history pivoted, and where ordinary men accomplished the extraordinary. By mid-1942, the Japanese Empire had achieved conquests beyond even optimistic pre-war projections. In 6 months, Japanese forces had seized territory stretching from Burma to the Central Pacific, controlling resources and populations that made Japan a genuine superpower. The strategy, conceived before Pearl Harbor, called for rapid expansion followed by defense of a perimeter so vast that America would negotiate peace rather than pay the blood price to reconquer it. But Japanese strategic thinking contained fatal flaws. The perimeter was too extensive to defend adequately. Resources were finite. And critically, Japanese planners underestimated American industrial capacity and fighting spirit. The Doolittle raid on Tokyo in April 1942, though materially insignificant, demonstrated American determination. The Battle of Midway in June destroyed 4 Japanese fleet carriers and killed hundreds of irreplaceable veteran pilots, eliminating Japan's offensive naval striking power. By July 1942, Japanese forces occupied the Solomon Islands, an archipelago stretching southeast from Rabaul toward Australia. Intelligence reports indicated Japanese construction of an airfield on Guadalcanal, the island chain's largest member. This airfield, once operational, would threaten Allied shipping lanes to Australia and provide a base for further Japanese expansion. Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Fleet, and General Douglas MacArthur both recognized that Japanese control of Guadalcanal was strategically intolerable. The decision to attack Guadalcanal represented a compromise between competing American strategic visions. MacArthur advocated a southwestern Pacific approach, driving through New Guinea toward the Philippines. Admiral Chester Nimitz favored a central Pacific thrust across the Gilbert and Marshall Islands toward Japan. Guadalcanal fit neither plan perfectly, but offered an opportunity to seize initiative before Japanese defenses hardened. Planning occurred under severe time constraints. Intelligence was fragmentary. Reconnaissance photos showed an airfield under construction, but provided limited information about Japanese troop strength or defensive preparations. Logistical support was improvised. The 1st Marine Division had trained for amphibious operations, but never executed one under combat conditions. Supporting naval forces had never conducted a major amphibious assault. Everything about Operation Watchtower, as the Guadalcanal invasion was codenamed, was experimental. Marines called it Operation Shoestring. They weren't wrong. The operation launched with insufficient shipping, inadequate supplies, incomplete intelligence, and improvised command arrangements. But it launched nonetheless because the strategic window was closing. Every week's delay meant stronger Japanese defenses. In war, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Operation Watchtower would proceed with what was available, not what was desired. The invasion force that appeared off Guadalcanal on August 7th represented the largest American amphibious operation since 1898. 75 warships and transports carried the 1st Marine Division and supporting units. 3 aircraft carriers, USS Saratoga, USS Enterprise, and USS Wasp, provided air cover. Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner commanded the amphibious force, Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher the carrier task force, Vandegrift the landing force. At 9:10 hours, the 1st Marines waded ashore at Red Beach on Guadalcanal's northern coast. They encountered no opposition. The beach landing, expected to be a bloodbath, proceeded smoothly. Marines advanced inland through steaming jungle, cutting through dense vegetation, anticipating ambush at every turn. Still no Japanese. By nightfall, 11,000 Marines were ashore with minimal casualties. The airfield, soon named Henderson Field after a Marine aviator killed at Midway, was captured intact on August 8th. The ease of the landing was misleading. Japanese construction workers had fled into the jungle at the first sight of the invasion fleet. The small Japanese garrison, approximately 2,800 men, was scattered across the island and incapable of mounting coordinated resistance. But Japanese forces in the region, particularly at Rabaul, 650 miles northwest, responded immediately. The 11th Air Fleet launched strikes against the invasion fleet on August 7th and 8th. Japanese aircraft damaged several ships and demonstrated the vulnerability of amphibious forces to air attack. On August 9th, disaster struck the Allied fleet. Japanese Vice Admiral Junichi Mikawa, commanding a force of 7 cruisers and 1 destroyer, executed a brilliant nocturnal approach to Guadalcanal. In the early morning hours, his ship surprised Allied cruisers screening the invasion force in what became known as the Battle of Savo Island. In less than an hour of savage fighting, Japanese torpedoes and gunfire sank 4 Allied cruisers, USS Astoria, USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, and HMAS Canberra, killing over 1,000 sailors. It was the worst defeat in U.S. Navy history. The Battle of Savo Island had immediate consequences. Admiral Fletcher, concerned about fuel states and air attacks, withdrew his carriers on August 9th, taking with them the invasion force's air cover. Admiral Turner, fearing further Japanese surface attacks without carrier protection, withdrew his transports and cargo ships before completely unloading supplies. The Marines on Guadalcanal suddenly found themselves isolated, partially supplied, and without naval support. Vandegrift's Marines controlled Henderson Field and a perimeter around it, but little else. They had limited food, insufficient ammunition, inadequate medical supplies, and no way to evacuate wounded. They faced a Japanese force that controlled the sea approaches and could land reinforcements at will. The situation was desperate, but the Marines, products of a core culture that emphasized improvisation and tenacity, began digging in for what every man knew would be a long, brutal fight. Henderson Field became the campaign's strategic center of gravity. Whoever controlled the airfield controlled the battle space. If Japanese forces recaptured Henderson, American forces on Guadalcanal would be isolated and doomed. If Americans held Henderson and based aircraft there, they could contest Japanese control of surrounding waters and prevent enemy reinforcement. The first aircraft landed at Henderson on August 20th. 19 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 12 SBD Dauntless dive bombers of Marine Air Group 23, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Mangrum. These aircraft, operating from a primitive strip hacked from jungle, became known as the Cactus Air Force, Cactus being Guadalcanal's code name. Their mission was simple: intercept Japanese air raids, attack Japanese ships, and support ground forces. Their resources were minimal: limited fuel, sparse ammunition, few spare parts, and constant maintenance challenges. The Cactus Air Force's presence fundamentally altered the strategic equation. Japanese ships could no longer approach Guadalcanal in daylight without risking air attack. This forced Japanese reinforcement and supply operations into nocturnal runs down the slot, the channel between Solomon Islands leading to Guadalcanal. These runs, executed by fast destroyer transports, became known as the Tokyo Express, or more colorfully, the Rat Run. The Tokyo Express could deliver troops and limited supplies, but could not transport heavy equipment or conduct sustained resupply. Henderson Field itself was a nightmare. The runway, constructed by Japanese engineers using coral and crushed rock, turned to mud during tropical downpours. Aircraft bogged down. Maintenance crews worked in conditions that would have grounded any normal air operation. Spare parts were cannibalized from wrecked aircraft. Fuel was rationed. Pilots flew multiple missions daily in aircraft that should have been grounded for maintenance. Exhaustion was universal. Japanese forces bombarded Henderson nightly. Warships positioned offshore pounded the airfield with naval gunfire. Betty bombers flew from Rabaul to drop bombs on the strip. Sleep became impossible. Marines and sailors working on the airfield endured constant shelling, air raids, and sniper fire. Casualties mounted. Equipment was destroyed, but the airfield remained operational. Every morning, despite previous night's bombardment, aircraft took off to contest Japanese control of the surrounding waters. The conditions on Guadalcanal defied description. Heat and humidity were oppressive. Tropical diseases, malaria, dengue fever, dysentery ravaged both sides. The jungle, dense and nearly impenetrable, concealed enemies at arm's reach. Food was scarce. Marines subsisted on reduced rations, often just rice captured from Japanese stocks. Clean water was limited. Sanitation was primitive. Wounded men suffered in field hospitals that lacked adequate medical supplies. Corpses, American and Japanese, lay unburied because recovery was impossible. Japanese commanders, initially dismissing the Marines as weak opponents who would flee at the first serious attack, underestimated their adversaries catastrophically. Japanese strategy called for piecemeal reinforcement, followed by overwhelming nighttime assaults that would drive the Marines into the sea. This strategy failed repeatedly, at enormous cost. The first major Japanese assault came on August 21st at the Battle of the Tenaru River. Colonel Keanu Ikiki, commanding 916 troops landed via destroyer, attacked the Marine perimeter. Convinced that Marines would crumble under determined assault, Ikiki ordered a frontal attack across the sandbar at the Tenaru River mouth. Marines, forewarned by intelligence and dug into prepared positions, slaughtered the attackers with machine gun and artillery fire. At dawn, Marine tanks counterattacked, crushing Japanese positions. Of Ikiki's force, fewer than 130 survived. Ikiki committed suicide. The Battle of the Tenaru demonstrated Japanese tactical doctrine's fatal flaws. Emphasis on offensive spirit and close combat, effective against Chinese forces, proved suicidal against Marines equipped with automatic weapons and supported by artillery. Japanese attacks, typically conducted at night with units advancing in column, were channeled into killing zones where American firepower massacred them. But Japanese commanders, doctrinally committed to offensive action, continued ordering frontal assaults. In September, Japanese reinforcements brought their strength on Guadalcanal to approximately 6,000 troops. Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi, commanding these forces, planned a more sophisticated assault. His troops would approach through the jungle from the south, attack at night, and seize Henderson Field before Marines could react. The plan was sound. The execution was disastrous. The Battle of Edson's Ridge, fought September 12-14, became legendary in Marine Corps history. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, commanding a composite force of raiders and paramarines on a ridge south of Henderson Field, faced Kawaguchi's main assault. For 2 nights, Japanese infantry attacked uphill against entrenched Marines. The fighting was savage, often hand-to-hand. Japanese soldiers, attacking with bayonets and shouting battle cries, reached Marine positions repeatedly. Each time, Marines counterattacked, throwing the Japanese back. Artillery fire, called danger close repeatedly, broke up massed Japanese formations. When dawn broke on September 14th, the ridge, soon renamed Bloody Ridge or Edson's Ridge, was littered with Japanese dead. Kawaguchi had lost approximately 1,200 killed. Marine casualties were about 250. The ridge held. Henderson Field remained in American hands. Kawaguchi withdrew his shattered force into the jungle, his offensive capability destroyed. October brought renewed Japanese efforts. Reinforcements increased Japanese strength to over 20,000 troops. The Imperial Japanese Army committed the 2nd Division, experienced units that had fought in China. Japanese planners, certain that previous failures resulted from insufficient force, prepared a multi-pronged offensive that would overwhelm Marine defenses through sheer mass. The attack, scheduled for October 22-25, would be coordinated with a massive naval operation to destroy American naval forces and bombard Henderson Field into rubble. The battles around the Matanika River in late October represented the campaign's crescendo. Japanese forces, attacking from multiple directions, sought to break through Marine lines and seize Henderson Field. The fighting was desperate. Japanese artillery, heavier than previously encountered, pounded Marine positions. Infantry assaults came in waves. Marines, reinforced by Army units from the American Division, held their positions through a combination of firepower, tenacity, and tactical skill that Japanese forces could not overcome. At one critical moment, Sergeant John Basilone, commanding a machine gun section, held a position alone after his gunners were killed or wounded. Through the night of October 24-25, Basilone fired his machine guns continuously, killing hundreds of attacking Japanese soldiers. When his guns overheated, he carried them to the beach, cooled them in the surf, returned to position, and resumed firing. His actions, and those of countless other Marines fighting their own desperate battles, held the line. Basilone later received the Medal of Honor. By October 26, the Japanese offensive had failed. Casualties were catastrophic. Japanese forces suffered over 3,500 dead, Marine and Army forces about 1,000. Japanese offensive capability was exhausted. The jungle was filled with unburied bodies. Disease ravaged both sides, but the Marines held Henderson Field. The airfield, muddy, cratered under constant bombardment, continued operations. While ground forces fought for Henderson Field, naval forces contested control of the surrounding waters in a series of battles that nearly destroyed both fleets. The campaign featured 7 major naval engagements, more than any other Pacific campaign. Each battle followed a similar pattern. Japanese ships, attempting to reinforce Guadalcanal or bombard Henderson Field, encountered American naval forces. The resulting battles, often fought at night in confused conditions, saw massive destruction on both sides. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons, August 24-25, was the first carrier engagement since Midway. Japanese carriers sought to destroy American carriers supporting Guadalcanal while simultaneously landing reinforcements. American aircraft, launched from Enterprise in Saratoga, sank the light carrier Ryujo and damaged a seaplane tender. Japanese aircraft damaged Enterprise, forcing her withdrawal for repairs. The battle was tactically indecisive, but strategically significant. Japanese reinforcement efforts were disrupted. The Battle of Cape Esperance, October 11-12, saw American cruisers and destroyers intercept a Japanese bombardment force. In a confused night action, American ships surprised and defeated the Japanese force, sinking a cruiser and destroyer while losing one destroyer. The victory, America's first clear surface naval win of the Pacific War, boosted morale, but it was overshadowed by events 2 nights later. On the night of October 13-14, 2 Japanese battleships, Kongo and Haruna, bombarded Henderson Field for 90 minutes, firing 918 14-inch shells into the airfield perimeter. The bombardment was devastating. Aircraft were destroyed, fuel dumps set ablaze, the runway cratered. When dawn broke, Henderson Field resembled a moonscape. Yet incredibly, by afternoon, Seabees had patched the runway sufficiently for aircraft operations to resume. The Japanese bombardment, though destructive, failed to achieve its objective of permanently closing the airfield. The Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, October 26, was another carrier engagement. Japanese and American carrier task forces clashed northeast of Guadalcanal. The battle was tactically a Japanese victory. American carrier Hornet was sunk, Enterprise damaged again. But strategically, the battle favored America. Japanese losses in aircraft and experienced pilots were unsustainable. The carrier Shikaku was badly damaged. The carrier Zuiho was hit. Most critically, Japan lost 100 aircraft and their irreplaceable crews. The Japanese carrier force, though victorious tactically, was crippled strategically. November brought the campaign's naval climax. Japanese forces planned a massive reinforcement operation. 11 transports carrying 11,000 troops would be escorted by warships that would first neutralize Henderson Field through bombardment. American intelligence detected the operation. Admiral William Halsey, recently appointed Commander South Pacific, committed every available ship to stop it. The Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, fought November 12-15, was actually 3 separate engagements that collectively decided the campaign. The first night, American cruisers and destroyers intercepted Japanese bombardment forces in a point-blank melee that saw both forces devastated. 2 American admirals died, Rear Admiral Daniel Callaghan and Rear Admiral Norman Scott, killed in action aboard burning cruisers. The battleship Hiei was crippled and later sunk by aircraft. Japanese Vice Admiral Hiroki Abe withdrew. His mission to bombard Henderson failed. The second night, November 13-14, Japanese battleship Kirishima and supporting cruisers approached Guadalcanal. American battleships Washington and South Dakota with destroyer escorts intercepted. In a savage engagement, South Dakota's electrical systems failed, making her a target for Japanese guns. Washington, using radar fire control, engaged Kirishima at close range, hitting her repeatedly with 16-inch shells. Kirishima, shattered and burning, sank the next morning. It was America's first battleship versus battleship victory of the war. The third phase saw American aircraft from Henderson Field and Enterprise attack the Japanese transport convoy. Of 11 transports, only 4 reached Guadalcanal. Those 4 were beached and burned by Marine artillery and aircraft. Of 11,000 troops embarked, only 2,000 reached shore with their equipment. The remainder drowned or reached shore without weapons or supplies. The naval battle of Guadalcanal was strategically decisive. Japanese attempts to reinforce and resupply Guadalcanal in strength had failed catastrophically. 2 more naval battles followed, Tassafaronga on November 30 and Rennell Island on January 29-30, 1943. Both demonstrated Japanese tactical skill in night surface combat and American vulnerabilities, but neither changed the strategic reality. Japan could no longer adequately resupply its forces on Guadalcanal. American naval and air power, operating from Henderson Field, controlled the sea space sufficiently to strangle Japanese logistics. By December 1942, the campaign's outcome was decided, though neither side acknowledged it. American forces controlled Henderson Field and a steadily expanding perimeter. 2 Marine divisions and 2 Army divisions, over 50,000 troops, held the island with adequate supplies and air support. Japanese forces, by contrast, numbered about 25,000 troops starving in the jungle, ravaged by disease, without adequate food, ammunition, or medical supplies. Japanese strategic planning recognized reality before field commanders did. The Imperial General Headquarters, analyzing the situation, concluded that Guadalcanal could not be held. The losses in ships, aircraft, and trained personnel were unsustainable. Resources committed to Guadalcanal were desperately needed elsewhere. In late December, Japanese leadership made the decision to evacuate Guadalcanal and establish a new defensive line in the Central Solomons. The evacuation, codenamed Operation Key, demonstrated Japanese military skill at its finest. Using Tokyo Express destroyer runs, Japanese forces conducted a fighting withdrawal, bringing off approximately 10,500 troops in 3 evacuation runs during the first week of February 1943. American forces, detecting increased destroyer activity, assumed Japan was reinforcing. When Marines and Army troops finally advanced into Japanese positions, they found them abandoned. On February 9, 1943, Major General Alexander Patch, commanding XIV Corps, the 1st Marine Division had been withdrawn in December due to losses and disease, declared Guadalcanal secure. The 6-month campaign was over. The first Allied offensive of the Pacific War had succeeded. The casualty figures from Guadalcanal demonstrate the campaign's intensity. American forces suffered approximately 7,100 killed, about 1,600 Marines and soldiers killed in ground combat, over 5,000 sailors killed in naval actions. Japanese losses were catastrophic. Over 19,000 soldiers killed in combat or dead from disease and starvation, and approximately 3,800 sailors killed in naval engagements. The material losses were staggering. The waters around Guadalcanal, known as Ironbottom Sound due to the number of ships sunk there, became the grave of dozens of vessels. The U.S. Navy lost 2 fleet carriers, Wasp and Hornet, 8 cruisers, and 14 destroyers. The Japanese lost 2 battleships, 1 light carrier, 3 heavy cruisers, 1 light cruiser, and 11 destroyers. Aircraft losses exceeded 1,000 on each side, with Japan's losses particularly crippling due to the deaths of irreplaceable veteran pilots. Beyond statistics lay the human dimension. Marines and soldiers evacuated from Guadalcanal were physical wrecks, emaciated by inadequate rations, ravaged by malaria and dysentery, psychologically scarred by months of combat. The 1st Marine Division lost over 1,200 dead and required a year to rebuild. Individual survivors carried memories of horror that haunted them for life. Friends killed in brutal close combat, the constant fear of nighttime attacks, the sight and smell of death in the tropical heat, the grinding exhaustion of sustained combat. Japanese survivors faced even worse. Starving, disease-ridden, many barely able to walk, evacuated troops represented a fraction of forces committed. The rest died, killed in futile attacks, starved in the jungle, or too sick to evacuate. Japanese military culture, which emphasized victory or death, offered no framework for understanding defeat. Guadalcanal's survivors carried not just physical scars but the psychological burden of failure in a culture that did not accommodate failure. Guadalcanal marked the Pacific War's turning point. For the first time, American forces had seized and held Japanese-controlled territory. For the first time, Japanese forces had been decisively defeated in sustained combat. The psychological impact was profound. American forces gained confidence. Japanese forces, previously considering themselves invincible, learned they could be beaten. Strategically, Guadalcanal destroyed Japanese offensive capability. The troops, ships, aircraft, and pilots lost at Guadalcanal were irreplaceable. Japan's industrial base, vastly inferior to America's, could not replace losses at the rate America could. The Solomons campaign would continue for another 18 months as American forces advanced up the slot, but Japan would never again mount a major offensive in the Pacific. The campaign validated American strategic concepts. Amphibious operations, though improvised at Guadalcanal, demonstrated their potential. Naval aviation, operating from both carriers and land bases, proved decisive in controlling sea space. Joint operations, Marines, Army, Navy, and Army Air Forces working together, showed that inter-service cooperation, despite friction, could achieve operational success. The lessons learned at Guadalcanal informed subsequent Pacific campaigns. The importance of logistics, initially underestimated, became paramount in future planning. Naval construction priorities shifted toward ships needed for amphibious operations, destroyers for screening, transports for carrying troops, and escort carriers for air support. Training emphasized night combat, jungle warfare, and the unique challenges of fighting in the Pacific's conditions. For Japan, Guadalcanal exposed strategic bankruptcy. The perimeter defense concept required resources Japan did not possess. Losses at Guadalcanal made defending the remaining perimeter even more difficult. Japanese strategic planning shifted from offense to defense, from expansion to preservation. But the fundamental problem remained. Japan could not match American industrial output or replace trained personnel at rates necessary for sustained conflict. The Guadalcanal campaign established patterns that would define the Pacific War's remainder. American forces would execute amphibious assaults against Japanese-held islands. Air power, both carrier-based and land-based, would control the sea space. Naval forces would engage in surface battles, progressively mastering night combat techniques where Japanese forces initially excelled. Ground combat would be brutal, with Japanese forces fighting to the death and American forces learning to overcome defenders who would not surrender. The campaign produced heroes whose names entered American military legend. Vandegrift, commanding the 1st Marine Division through impossible conditions, demonstrated leadership that earned him the Medal of Honor and eventual Commandant of the Marine Corps. John Basilone became a national hero. Joe Foss, a Marine fighter pilot, shot down 26 Japanese aircraft and received the Medal of Honor. Dozens of other Marines, soldiers, sailors, and airmen earned decorations for actions that ranged from heroic to superhuman. The campaign also produced controversies that lingered for decades. Admiral Fletcher's decision to withdraw carriers on August 9th remained debated. Was it prudent caution or abandonment of the Marines? The Battle of Savo Island raised questions about American naval leadership and training. The relief of Marine Major General Archer, Vandegrift's contemporary, Army Major General Robert Eichelberger, highlighted inter-service tensions. These debates, while important to understanding the campaign, should not overshadow the fundamental achievement. American forces attacked, persevered, and won. Guadalcanal was never supposed to be decisive. It was a limited operation with modest objectives: seize an airfield, establish a base, disrupt Japanese expansion. But the campaign's logic, once engaged, drove both sides to total commitment. What began as a raid evolved into an attritional struggle neither side could afford to lose. By the time it ended, Guadalcanal had become the hinge upon which the Pacific War turned. The Marines who landed on August 7, 1942, could not have imagined what they were beginning. They expected a difficult operation that would last weeks. Instead, they fought for 6 months under conditions that broke men and units. They endured bombing, shelling, night attacks, disease, starvation, and exhaustion. Many did not survive. Those who did were forever changed. But they accomplished something remarkable. They stopped Japanese expansion. They proved American forces could fight and win in the Pacific's brutal conditions. They established the beachhead from which subsequent offensives would be launched.